I'm Sharon Barnes-Waters, and welcome to CityViews, the show about people, places, and things that make New York great. Well, we're continuing our series about each borough, what makes them special, great, the initiatives and programs that are happening there, sitting down with each borough president and a business owner or organization that is making that borough thrive. So today, we go to the Bronx, the Boogie Down Bronx.
Boogie Down Bronx, that's right.
And we're sitting here with Borough President Rubén Díaz Jr. and Majora Carter from the Majora Carter Group. Welcome to CityViews.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Boogie Down Bronx.
Yes. You can't have views on the city without talking about the Boogie
Yes.
Down Bronx.
Very incomplete.
So, I want to start with, born and raised in the Bronx. But you started at an early age in politics, and I was quite amused. I was like, you were elected to New York State Assembly at the age of 23. You were named one of City Hall's 40 under 40 for being young, influential member of the New York City politics. Then became the borough president. So let me see. Take me back to a young Rubén growing up in the Bronx. What did you see, feel, and experience that made you want to make the Bronx great?
To be under 40 again. Yes, when you look at the Bronx, we're the birthplace of hip-hop.
Yes.
The birthplace of doo-wop. We are the cradle of salsa. That's why we're known as Condado de la Salsa. And of course, we have the Yankees, the world-renowned Yankees, right?
I'm a Yankee fan.
Yankee fan.
Sorry, Queens.
Growing up, whenever I get asked this question, I always have like mixed feelings, right? Because all of the negative stereotypes and the negative images of the Bronx in the 70s and the 80s, I grew up in that. I grew up in rubble. We played in rubble. We didn't have the parks that we have today, and I'll speak a little bit about that. We didn't have, all of the amenities. We saw burnt down buildings. There was a crack epidemic. There was a lot of crime. And yet, it was one of the most fondest moments and times of my life where we played stickball, where we played football in the street. We had a lot of baseball games. We were Sandlots kids. Kick the can.
Yes.
And so, all of it, the good and the bad, helped shape who I am. And I think has allowed me to be that representative that not only speaks to the challenges that we have in our borough, but also appreciating whenever we have that progress, whenever we're moving forward. And so I got involved in politics at a very early age. I was introduced by my parents, namely my dad, at the age of 7, working in campaigns. I ran for what's called a district leader at the age of 21. At 22, I ran for the Assembly for the first time and lost that race in the Soundview, Hunts Point section of the Bronx, Southern Boulevard. And then at the age of 36, I became the 13th borough president. And it's there that I think that over the last 8 years, we've seen a real turnaround. Working
because you came in and you're like, this needs to be done.
Yeah, and so I get a lot of the accolades and the recognition as the borough president, but the fact is that there's so many individuals from activists and advocates to elected officials to community boards. And what people don't know about the Bronx today is that we're not the Bronx that I grew up in.
Right.
Today, we are a Bronx that over the last 8 years alone, we've seen over $12.5 billion, private dollars invested in our borough. We've cut unemployment by more than half. And it's not just, unemployment statistics, but we have the largest workforce participation since the books have been kept in unemployment. And that's not me giving you that statistic. That's the Department of Labor of the state of New York. We've seen over 29,000 units of housing. The majority of them have been affordable and low income.
Because I know the borough presidents have all brought this up about housing, affordable housing to keep Bronx residents in the Bronx. Is it affordable?
So we have to do a mix, and that becomes complex. We could do a whole show on that. But the reality is that we still have folks who are financially challenged, and we're doing everything that we can, not only to protect them in the apartments where they are now, but when you look at the new housing to make it low income, there's some income bands. But Sharon, at the same time, we have another issue that we have to deal with, and that's how do we retain our young professionals?
Right.
So my sons, who are 25 and 22, they've done as well as so many other young folks. They have done in the Bronx everything that we've asked them to do. go to school, get an education, get a college degree, and get a career, right? And once upon a time, whenever you did that and you were from the Bronx, you cut and ran.
Right.
Now, how is it that because of the amenities, because of public parks and green spaces and all of the restaurants and the nightlife, you know, we're seeing that level of investment where tourism is back. Our tourism is 14% in the last 2 years. We've seen, you know, the nightlife thrive. And so more and more young folks are making it, but they want to stay.
They want to
so
stay.
whenever we do housing, we have to do it for the low income, but also for those who have done everything that we've asked them to do.
And speaking about this, Majora, I'm going to bring you in. Tell us about your business and what you have done to make the Bronx thrive. Why the Bronx?
Well, number one, I'm a few years, like several years older than my illustrious borough president. But yeah, whatever. But I lived through the exact same things that he did, you know, watching the buildings burn, you know, really. And also, frankly, I was one of the ones who also used education as my way to get out of the Bronx. Like, I was cutting and running like everybody else. And you know, and we are from a generation, you know, of folks who measured success by how far we got out of our borough. And, you know, and my initial work was in the sustainability world. Like, I was, you know, working to make sure that our city looked at the Bronx not just as a place that was a repository for all the things that wealthier and usually whiter communities can afford to avoid, you know, which in particular were waste facilities and power plants. And I started focusing on developing parks and the kind of green open spaces that people wanted to see. But it became really clear that that type of green infrastructure was beautiful and people needed it, and we knew that they'd leave the community in order to experience that. But when it came right down to it, we knew that it was the lifestyle infrastructure that was keeping people from staying in the Bronx. Because I do a lot of talks right now, and so I think there definitely is a group of folks that are a little bit older who are just sort of like, I would stay if I could, if there was the type of housing that met me where I needed to, where it was the quality that I wanted, that was beautiful and attracted me to it, that had like all of the lifestyle infrastructure with the restaurants, the clubs, you name it, all of that kind of stuff. But the younger kids don't really see that. I mean, because I speak to students all over a lot and ask them, you know, if they're going away to college, you know, are you coming back? And they're like, no. No.
So they're still saying the same thing you did years ago?
There's still, I think, there's people who are starting to look back at the Bronx like, yes, I want to stay here, but we need to make sure that we're going to keep them here by making sure that the housing is here. And so I'm really happy that we have a borough president who's not afraid to say, like, yeah, you know, we're going to do affordable housing for the income bands that are very low income, but we can't forget about the people that will go unless we can make sure that we're building the type of housing that's going to keep them here.
And when you both talking about people staying and young people using their creative geniuses right there in the Bronx, you're both interested in the tech space. Tech meetup, tech summit.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say that Majora Carter is a walking example and sort of a microcosm, a living, walking microcosm of what's happening in our borough, which is once upon a time, you know, we were sort of like, you know, victims of urban plight. And now we went from there to environmental injustice, to then cleaning up our green spaces, and then making sure that you stay and become men and women who have our own businesses and developers, and taking our own destiny and putting it in our own hands. And so with that comes a maturation, and with that comes a conversation that evolves to the tech. And when you look at the economy of today, how is it that not only we make affordability in terms of housing for our residents, but how do we equip them for the economy of today and the future? And so Majora's been working a lot with our kids in the Hunts Point area in particular around tech and getting them ready, and not only getting them ready, but they are ready. It's just how do you tie them into the tech world?
Right.
We've been doing that.
Not Silicon Valley, not Brooklyn,
no,
Bronx.
We're
Stay
going
right
to bring it to them. In fact, if you look, our schools and our teachers, we have everything from a tech summit to Bronx codes. We have a lot of different tech companies looking at Port Morris and the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. And we are making a strong bid to bring Amazon.
I heard.
Into the Boogie Down Bronx.
The second headquarters?
Yeah, the second headquarters. So and not only just a tech world, but whether it's mechanics, whether you have the healthcare industry, everything is technology. Right. I'm so happy that one of my sons is already doing coding and programming in the city of New York.
Fantastic.
He's independent, has gone off on his own, is doing well. And so we want to make sure that we do that for the current generation and future generations of the Bronx and the city of New York.
Right. So I'm going to ask you, Majora, how can businesses thrive in the Bronx? Do a pitch. Why should a business decide to lay down roots in the Bronx? Can they thrive?
The fact of the matter is the talent has always been in the Bronx. What we need to make sure that we're doing is actually making sure that we've got the reasons for them to stay in the Bronx. And so it's interesting that I saw the press release about, you know, making sure that Amazon knew that the Bronx was open, you know, for them, which is brilliant. And
thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I saw that. Like,
but I've met Jeff Bezos a number of times, and interestingly enough, they're so not interested, or not to say they're not interested, but you know, affordable land's not what's interesting to them. What they really care about, which is interesting that we're talking about it here right now, is retaining the talent that they know they're going to get. So we need to make sure that, number one, the talent that's here in the Bronx is absolutely prepared to participate, and so that we're making sure that the small businesses that we know often don't stay in the Bronx are actually there, so that we can actually be the ones who are feeding Amazon to some degree, and that we're the ones getting those contracts and doing that kind of business. And how do we make sure that that happens? But it's the lifestyle infrastructure that also keeps their talent, because they do their best to hire the best they possibly can. Like they're at that scale where they're like, you know, they can get who they want. And so we need to make sure that we've got who they want.
So generally speaking, when I try to make a pitch, whether it's to Amazon or other corporations or the businesses, I say a number of things. A, our transportation infrastructure is getting even better. We have 4 Metro North stations on the pipeline. We're close to Manhattan. We're much more affordable, not only with regards to where you house your business, but for the apartments and living quarters of those individuals who may want to come and work in that business. We're accessible to the other 4 boroughs easily, but also to Westchester and White Plains or New Jersey. We're the only borough that's connected to the continental United States.
Well.
We're the safest Bronx that the world has seen in the last 50 years. So, you know, again, those negative stereotypes are, of yesteryear. And then what we've been doing is, and specifically for the Amazons of the world, is that we've been cultivating that workforce through the programs and that we have in our schools, through the leadership of Majora Carter and others. We have different high-tech institutions like Prescolas who are really training our Bronxites. And so with all of that said, the amenities, the flavor of the Bronx. You know, this is something that whether you're from the Bronx or not, more and more people, especially you know, young folks, are looking for that culture, the music, the heritage. You know, and so
rich history.
You know, we have space. We have the space that others don't have in other boroughs. And so I'm looking forward to not only growing businesses in our borough, but also attracting those mega businesses like Amazon to the Bronx.
And so this is exciting because my partner, Tina Shoulders, who's this amazing tech founder also from the Bronx, we co-founded the Bronx Tech Meetup. And we started with the 2 of us, and now it's more than 800 members strong. And it's actually the largest tech meetup in the entire country, run by 2 women of color. Thank you
Women
very
of
much.
color, too.
Yeah, and so we're like, we know we're good. Only in the Bronx. So there you go. But what's interesting is that many of the folks that are in the Bronx Tech Meetup, and actually our members, almost all of them are from the Bronx, but many of them don't still live in the Bronx. So we're looking at this as a real opportunity to bring them back. So I am so looking forward to working with the Borough President's office to make sure that we can make that happen.
And you've talked about the misconceptions of the Bronx. Tell me something that would really surprise people about the Bronx.
So, for instance, let's talk about crime, because I think that that's the elephant in the room. This is the one thing that people, if you're not from the Bronx and you're going to come visit us, if you tell your family, they say, oh, be careful.
Get out before sundown.
Right. So, for instance, in 1990, Sharon, in that 1 year, when I was 17 years old, the homicide rate in the Bronx was 653.
Wow.
If you look at the national metric system on homicides, so you can compare one municipality to the other, we are safer than Houston, Dallas. Today, we're safer than Boston. We're safer than D.C. We don't even have to go to Detroit, and we don't have to go to Chicago. That was us 30 years ago. And if you look, for instance, Hollywood did a movie called Fort Apache, the Bronx. Back in 1981, Paul Newman was the lead actor, and it was about the 41st Precinct. And that was a very challenging precinct. The 41st Precinct today is one of the safest precincts, not just in the Bronx, but in the entire city of New York. In fact, the mayor and the commissioner, they just had a press conference to talk about the crime reduction rate in the city of New York, and they held it at the 401 Precinct, what was known as Fort Apache, the Bronx. So we want Hollywood to do another story on us, right?
Well, an update. And we can, because we're actually going to be doing, so another one of the businesses that we do is, and the borough president was right, I've been launching businesses just to show that this could happen, done by local people from our communities, and really using myself as an example, but also incubating others. But one of them is a coffee shop called the Boogie Down Grind Cafe. First locally owned coffee shop we've had in the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx since the 1980s.
1980s?
Yes.
So not only do we have that, but we have sushi as well in the Bronx now. We have microbreweries in our borough. We have the film studios where we have Silver Cup that did their third studio in our borough, and that we can have York Studio, an entire campus in the Soundview section of the Bronx. We're revitalizing Orchard Beach. So a lot is happening.
So that's why you want tourists to come to the Bronx.
Right. So I wanted to just about the coffee, and the reason with the coffee was the coffee thing is that my district is the 41st Precinct as well. We're going to be hosting a Coffee with the Cop event at our coffee shop. We're setting up the date. So, and who would have thought that that would have happened at some time before? But to your other question about what people would be surprised about, I travel a lot. A lot of my work is actually outside of my home borough, unfortunately. But I do get a chance to lecture, and I speak to people all the time. And there isn't a place that I go where I don't meet people that are from the Bronx.
Wow.
And what's so fascinating about that is that there are people out there, so many of them, who would come home and they're looking at the changes that have been happening recently. And they are so proud and so happy. And they're just like, you know what? I could make a move back there because you know what? The situation was very difficult before.
Rediscover the Bronx.
But the thing is, like the hometown people who were there and who understand that this is something that's changing and changing back to the better, but it's coming from within, and they're really proud of it. It's really incredible.
And I'm happy to hear that, because I think that we forget. And obviously life isn't perfect in the Bronx, right? Life isn't perfect anywhere. But people forget what we were going through. And so those who left had a lot of reason to leave. We were war-torn. We were worse than many of the war-torn countries in Europe or the Middle East. We were the model of urban decay for the entire nation. The problem is that we still haven't had the story retold. But as it's getting out there more and more and more, people are pleasantly surprised and shocked that the place that they called home is doing a whole lot better. It's healthier, and more people are visiting, and more people are starting to rediscover and reanalyze, and even trying to recalibrate to see how is it that they make the Bronx their home again.
And we still have some serious issues. Like I still believe that, I think in particular, some of the ways that the mayor is doing the affordable housing plan serves to concentrate poverty in places in the Bronx that are already incredibly poor. And we know from history, from stats, from studying this, that when you continue to concentrate poverty, you exacerbate everything that's associated with it, from poor economic, health outcomes, economic outcomes, educational outcomes. You do see higher rates in crime. And so so I think collectively, those of us who are really interested in seeing all of the Bronx thrive, all of it thrive, will be really focused on how do you create the kind of communities, that kind of are often written off in many ways, to the benefit of other parts of the borough. How do you create more development that literally makes people feel as though every neighborhood is getting better? That we are developing more opportunities for mixed income housing, so that kids they all have more examples, positive examples in their own community, so they can see aspirational models versus just ones that assume that the only thing they're ever going to be is poor.
Two quick last stats about the Bronx that people may not understand, and the reason why I believe we're better. Number one, we are a borough of 1.4 million. The majority of the people who live in the Bronx are women. And also 41% of the people who live in the Bronx were born in another country. So unfortunately, when you hear the invective and the vilification of women coming out of D.C., or of the immigrant population coming out of D.C., particularly in the White House, they should take a look at our borough. And if one wants to look at a place that was not doing so well and why it's doing well, it's because of women and immigrants.
Wow. Thank you. I want to say thank you to the Bronx Borough President, Rubén Díaz Jr., Majora Carter. I can see why you're so proud, and it's a rediscovering of the Bronx. Let's get the word out and bring people back home. Like, you left, but look what's happening now. Look how you're thriving. Take a look at the Bronx. Start your business here, raise your family here. You can do this. Thank you so much for stopping by CityViews. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.